Stephen, you're back. You are, you're looking more and more like a Marxist every time I see you. You're not a Marxist. You're our, in-house Trumpist.
My people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Please clap.
No, they say, Trump, we love you too.
Please clap.
Trump's voters are by far, I'm at 68,
Please clap.
69%. I'm at 90%.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't
We
see
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast.
Constitutional moderate. I think Trump did a good job, but I wouldn't exactly say I'm a Trumpist either.
I'm not a constitutional scholar, so I wouldn't really want to tread into that terrain. But what I am pointing out is that the reason why you are a constitutional moderate is because you too want to see democracy in the world. You want to see the people have rights. You want to see people you're for liberty and freedom for individuals and
Yes.
society. Right.
Absolutely.
Right. You and I have that in common. I am also for individual liberty and collective liberty, both. So I think of it. But let's just talk about the situation right now. It's kind of an interesting moment. What's coming up next politically is sort of in the background. I don't know if people are really thinking about the midterms yet, even though they're pretty close. I have been expecting for a little while now that the Democrats would hold in the midterm, not because that was what I wanted, but because of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I just thought that would activate the base of the Democratic supporters, and they would get out and keep the status quo in place.
I have the theory that was orchestrated by the left, Roe versus Wade.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. How would that be that they orchestrated the Supreme Court's decision?
I believe the Supreme Court is basically captured by the elite, and the elite are trying to foment discourse, violence between the left and the right. And it's not like the conservative members of the Supreme Court kind of wouldn't be getting what they want. Like, you would have to twist their arm too hard. But I basically think they got the green light to go because they knew how much trouble that would cause between the left and the right. How much. So
my difficulty here
that's
is
a wild theory.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to know, like, where do those orders come from? I mean, the claim that the Supreme Court, I mean, there's an alternative explanation, which is that there's been a long political battle to overturn Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was originally the original decision was not very constitutionally sound. Mm-hmm. That it was a poorly crafted decision. Not that the outcome was poor necessarily. If mm-hmm. you want to ensure a woman's right to choose, the outcome wasn't the wrong outcome. The way it came about, based on concerns about privacy, which were not. My understanding is that the Constitution doesn't really protect those rights as it is now.
I think everything you just said is reasonable. Like I said, that's kind of a far out theory I have based mm-hmm. on a lot of other stuff I've seen. But what you're saying is much more likely. And surprisingly enough, I, as someone who regards freedom almost above all, mm-hmm. I would be for a woman's right to choose. even though I find abortion personally abhorrent. I'm from a Catholic background, and but certainly in my mind, freedom offsets that balance. As much as I would hate to see anyone personally make that decision, I think they should have the freedom to do so. But there is this argument. I mean, it's important to understand in the abortion argument that we are not abolishing abortion with the falling of this decision. We are just taking it down to the states. And certainly there's an argument to be made that maybe that is something that should be left to the states, and the overall republic would be stronger if that were the case. So there are two ways of looking at it.
Right. I mean, the other alternative would be to pass federal legislation protecting the woman's right to choose, rather than.
And I think that would be our constitutional system at work, because that is the way the checks and balances of our system is supposed to work. Our republic works against being a pure democracy, where we would install wise people to make decisions to overcome maybe the passions of the majority. And in this case, you could argue that that's exactly what the Supreme Court would do in making a decision that would protect freedom, which in a society that puts freedom overall, that is not an irrational thing to accomplish. So,
I mean, overall, we don't.
It's a very complicated issue. There shouldn't be ultimate power anywhere in one place. There's balancing power in all different.
Right. Exactly. So okay. So this is like Schoolhouse Rock's level kind of politics.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
What should the law be on abortion?
Well, I have been pro-life.
I know. What should the law? I know your principle. That's a good value, but what should be the law?
This presidential election is going to be very important, because when you say what's the law, nobody knows what the law is going to be. It depends on who gets elected, because somebody's going to appoint conservative judges and somebody's going to appoint liberal judges, depending on who wins.
I've never understood the pro-life position.
Well,
I never understood it, because I understand the principle. It's human life as people see it. But what crime? What crime is it?
Well, it's human life.
No. Should the woman be punished for having an abortion?
Look. I would say that it's a very serious problem, and it's a problem that we have to decide on. It's very hard.
But you're forbidding
Are you going to say, well, wait, are you going to say put them in jail? Is that the punishment
what I'm asking
that you're talking about?
Because you say you want to ban it. What's that mean?
I am pro-life, yes.
What is ban? How do you ban abortion? How do you actually do it?
Well, you'll go back to a position like they had, where people will perhaps go to illegal places.
Yeah.
But you have to ban it.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no? As a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
10 cents, 10 years,
I don't know. That I don't know.
Why not?
I don't know.
You take positions and everything else.
Frankly, I do take positions and everything else. It's a very complicated position.
I think that this idea that Roe versus Wade was overturned due to elite orders, that there was some group that decided this would be the next step in the long-term plan to disrupt the American body politic, to disrupt civil society, to press down and suppress the population from having political expression. I think that idea is kind of a dangerous one. First of all, the most dangerous thing about it, from my perspective, is that it is to hold it means that you are comfortable holding an opinion that doesn't have any empirical grounds for it. You don't have any. You can't really. You can point to a bunch of different institutions that have accumulated a lot of power. You can definitely point to organizations that exist in order to facilitate elites' communication and decision making, like the Bilderberg Group, say, or the Trilateral Commission, but also like the Senate. It's also filled with elites. The Senate, the Congress, also filled with a kind of elite. To suggest that there is a communication between the Bilderberg Group or Trilateral Commission or whatever other organization you want to point to, and the Supreme Court. There's someone who can tell the Supreme Court justices, this is what we want you to do. He just doesn't have any, there's no foundation for that. There's no, I don't see any evidence of that. And then, so we don't want to just believe things because they feel right. So that's dangerous.
They're very good at hiding these kind of things. I mean, they're not going to just come right out in the open. And if it's happening, they're obviously going to work to obscure that fact. I mean, I see enough evidence. I'm convinced that that's exactly what's going on.
I used to be very interested in conspiracy theories, even around like 9/11. All right. Mm-hmm. I'm going to admit this on camera. This is something I don't like to talk about. It is a very bad look, but for a little while, I thought, well, what is going on with Building 7? Were there, bombs placed in those buildings? The project for New American Centuries surely did seem to be fulfilled by this attack on September 11th. Mm-hmm. And the thing about that conspiracy is that the pieces didn't all fit together, but there were at least some pieces, right? Like mm-hmm. There were some anomalies that I could point to that never really were completely addressed. One of them being that, as an example, when the World Trade Center 7 fell, the one that wasn't hit by planes, mm-hmm. The BBC announced or reported about 45 minutes ahead of schedule that it had already fallen. Okay, so there was a reporter standing on a balcony reporting the news. Building 7 was in the background, and she was saying, I just received word that the World Trade Center,
as you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
So the question is like, well, where did she get that report from? What who told her that it was going to collapse? And then you do think, oh, well, there's some elite group that knew about explosives in the building, knew when they were going to be set off, and then a miscommunication about timing or something happened between them and the BBC, and that happened. Mm-hmm. An alternative would be the firemen, the city officials were aware of the structural damage that had already taken place in World Trade Center 7, saw that it was on the verge of collapse, and let people know, cleared the area, let people know, let the reporters know, and that was garbled, in a game of telephone. So that could be it. And so at the time I thought, well, we don't know who told her, right? We don't know why that mistake was made. It's worth finding out. Yeah. That should be answered. And it never was, as far as I can tell. That was never really fully explained.
BBC did report the collapse of Building 7 before it actually occurred, but not because the network had inside information or was intentionally misleading the audience. BBC relied on an incorrect report from Reuters that said the building had collapsed, for which Reuters later issued a correction. According to a BBC story published on the 20-year anniversary of the terrorist attack. Because of persistent theories that the BBC was actively participating in some sort of attempt to manipulate the audience, BBC editor Richard Porter addressed the false theory in two 2007 blog posts. The scene on 9/11 was chaotic, and BBC's staff were talking directly to the emergency services and monitoring local and national media. And there was a fairly consistent picture being painted of Building 7 in danger of collapse.
The idea is that, for me, is that we just try to be very careful about what we can claim we know and what we intuit and question those intuitions as much as we can. So the other thing, though, about this idea that the Supreme Court was told is that, often enough when people dream up a cabal of elites, it leads to, the first thing it does is it takes responsibility for the problems in the world off of your shoulders and puts them onto somebody else's, some imaginary villain's shoulders. And then, so that means like, okay, everything I've been doing is fine. There's some outsider who's messing things up. So it means that we don't have to self-reflect. We don't have to think, well, what is it that we, like for COVID, for example, if that was a conspiracy, that means that there was nothing that people could have done just in everyday administrative ways to mitigate against COVID, right? I mean, if it was a conspiracy, then that takes your eye off the fact that we need to really examine, what do they call it when you make the virus transmissible from animal
gain of function?
Yeah, this kind of gain of function research.
Gain of function.
Gain of function research should be taking place at all. If it was a conspiracy, then whatever we see in public, like the fact that these grants have been proposed and received to do gain of function research, is sort of a sideshow, because the real nefarious activity is going on behind a curtain, behind closed doors. And so it takes our eye off the ball in a way. We know that gain of function research was prohibited, and that the scientific community, including Fauci, found ways around that prohibition. Fauci would say, oh, that wasn't gain of function. But from everything I understand of what gain of function was, what happened in the Wuhan lab was gain of function research.
Playing word games.
Oh, that was, it's terrible.
That was something I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Games. I got a quote for you here.
Okay.
No. Wrong device. Hang on.
Oh, yeah, too many devices. That's the one the NSA implanted in your home. So.
Right. All right. It should be something that people get angry about. Like, hey, you're effing with definitions in order to pretend that you're doing a good job. And this was Joe Rogan talking about Joe Biden claiming that the economy wasn't in recession, even though by the traditional definition, 2 quarters of negative growth, but Biden was saying, well, that's kind of, they basically wanted to change the words, to change the definition of what a recession is, so they could claim that we weren't really in a recession. And I would argue that this is why we have so much trouble, is because people are changing the definition of words, and we get to the point where we're talking about 2 different things when we're talking about given things.
Yeah, and like
we go back to the idea that you and I are both want the same thing.
Yeah,
that we want freedom, we want good situations for people, and yet I think that we look at words so different that we have the opposite thing in mind when we're saying the same words.
There are 2 reasons why the definitions of words change. One is that the one that Rogan brings up, right? I mean, there's more than 2 reasons probably, but there's 2 that come to mind for me. One is that the way to Rogan, the one that Rogan points to, and that's been happening in American politics for as long as I can remember. Yeah. Reagan used to do that kind of thing all the time. I mean, I believe the question of whether or not ketchup was counted as a vegetable, was sort of around that kind of question.
There a potato thing with?
Well, that was Dan Quayle a little later on.
Quayle, yeah.
And that was just a misspelling, but that was just a moment of him looking like an idiot on TV. But no, the Reagan was like, we don't have to change school lunches because and introduce more vegetables and more nutritious meals for the kids. After all, burger, fries, and ketchup. Well, that ketchup is a vegetable, right?
Right.
Well, it's, first of all, tomatoes aren't a vegetable, but secondly, I think they're fruits. That's considered fruit. But it's absurd, right? So, and the same thing with this question about recession. You can change the terms. And, look, the other day, I'm going to say this, and, make Chris Catrone mad at me, but possibly. But the other day I interviewed Chris Catrone. I just put that interview out, and he told me that the neoliberal period, from the early 80s until the end of the 90s, I believe was roughly the period, was the most expansive period in world history, that we saw more economic growth than we did in the post-war boom, which is not how I understood the reality to be. I did know that there was an upturn in the mid 80s, and that Clinton was in office during an upturn and during a time of low unemployment, and there was a lot of praise heaped upon him for that, but also that it ended roughly around the same time as his administration, with the dot-com bubble bursting. But the real truth is that when you look, it seemed to be, to me, when he sent me the links to verify, he was talking about the length of time that there was an expansion, not how fast the expansion was, what the rate of expansion was. So it was a very long period of time that the economy continued to expand without any year-to-year declines. Sometimes, your GDP will be less than it was the year before, and a recession is when the rate of growth starts to decline, and for a certain period of time. You have to, right? What is it?
Yeah.
2 years? 2 quarters, right. So we didn't have any recessions during that time. We didn't have an interruption in expansion, but the rate of expansion still matters. And the next time there was a big, long rate of expansion, a big, long, expansive period, was after the economic crisis of 2008, all through the Obama administration, all through the Trump administration.
But
and so you could say that was even more bigger. That was a longer boom than the post-war period, right? Only
because they were starting from so far down.
They started from very far down, and the rate of expansion was incredibly slow. Right. They didn't get, so we didn't. It was a plodding growth that was just, minuscule in comparison to what the projections were at the time, right? So to look back on the Obama era as a great economic miracle because it was expansive for so long is a way to rearrange the deck chairs and change the definitions. Now, I don't think Catrone did this on purpose. He was reading the newspapers, he was, but that comes from the Biden administration wanting to claim what a great economy we've been having up to.
I'll tell you what, since you brought neoliberalism up, I'd like to talk about that word as kind of an example of what I was talking about. Neoliberalism is a word that has been kind of changed to the point where, to me, it's almost worthless. Now, I would kind of compare it to what's called classic liberalism. Classic liberalism is kind of constitutional, small government. I would argue that neoliberalism has kind of added progressive elements in where they almost co-opted classic liberalism to create this new term, which they then blame on certain failures of capitalism, when it was the progressive additions between classic liberalism and neoliberalism that causes the problems. I mean, again, we get back to the words. I'm a capitalist, you're a socialist. And I believe that in the abstract, they mean the same thing. Socialism means the same thing to you as capitalism means to me. And our disagreement is completely in the way that we misinterpret those two words.
That may be that capitalism and socialism between us mean the same thing. But capitalism, as I understand it, is different than capitalism. I have a different definition of what capitalism is than you have.
Sure.
Right. And you have a different definition of what socialism is.
Right. But imagine the folly of us arguing about those when we don't agree on those terms.
Right. No, we need to talk about those terms.
We would have to hash that out, agree on a set of terms that would be a compromise between the two of us.
Yeah, but when you and I argue about what capitalism is and how to define it, we're not just talking about, well, do we want to use a different word? Right? We're not saying, oh, this is the right definition of the word and not this. We're saying, capitalism points to the current system of production and distribution of in society, right? The way we work and the way we consume. And then we both agree on that. So then the question is, how do we think that system functions? And that's
well, I don't really agree with that.
You don't. What is capitalism?
I would say that capitalism is an overused word that's almost used in place of free enterprise. And I kind of go by this notion that all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. And when you're talking about capitalism, you're getting into examples of free enterprise that are not, you have types of capitalism that aren't free enterprise, like corporatism or when I'm talking about capitalism, I'm talking about free enterprise in a constitutional sense, which is bulletproof. And that is being mixed in with these other types of capitalism, corporatism, monopolism. And the free enterprise is the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. Free enterprise is what we want. So all squares are rectangles, not all rectangles are squares. Not all forms of capitalism are free enterprise, but free enterprise is capitalism.
Right. We don't want small groups of people to dominate all production and exchange. We want everyone to be able to cooperate and compete in a free enterprise system. Everyone given the opportunity to be creative, to bring the products of their labor to the market, to create for the social good. That's free.
And the only thing we need to do to have that is free competition. Monopolism is the problem.
Right. So here's where this is a point of disagreement, but it's not a point of disagreement on values. Okay. It's not like I don't want free for people to be free to create what they're interested in creating, to have kind of an expression of through their creation. It's not as though I don't want people to look around at the world and say, oh, here's a need. I want to get people together and work on solving it. And then I want to be able to get back from society after I solve that need, what I need to survive. Like I have other people who work for me to solve a social problem or to provide for a desire that people have. It could be I've made hula hoops and people love hula hoops, and so I've done something of value, even if it's sort of trivial. Right. I have no difficulty with that. Right. The difficulty I have is with what lies beneath that. That's what Marx helps to explain. Well, I won't go too far into the whole value theory thing that I love to talk about, but the main point is that what constitutes value in even a free enterprise system has to do with the amount of time we spend working, and that because the time we spend working gives the commodities we produce their value in the market, that leads to contradictions and problems. And
but I think that's just muddy in the water. We can talk about use value versus time value.
Right.
The bottom line is you think about wanting a problem, or you want a hula hoop, and I can make you a hula hoop, and you choose to buy the hula hoop. That's free enterprise. How did we get from there to getting vaccines that no one wants, that we're being forced to take, that we don't know what's in them? I mean, all free enterprise takes, it's just me choosing to buy a product from you with full knowledge of what it is, informed consent, and I can choose to buy it or not.
I'm imagining myself going to Toys R Us, getting a hula hoop, starting to use it, and then just getting stuck by vaccine needles that are secretly implanted by the elite who told the Supreme Court. No,
sounds like one of your critical cuts to me.
right. Or like a short story I might write.
Yeah.
Okay, but all right. Well, that's a big jump, but we have to go slow. But one of the reasons why I talk about labor time and all this Marxist stuff is because one of the consequences of that approach to creating value is that capital tends to concentrate, even in a free enterprise system. That the way I think
really
of it
doesn't.
is,
It really doesn't.
Well, okay.
This is where you get to where you have the government interfering, and you have big companies using the power of government to give themselves advantage.
Mm-hmm.
That is how we get out of sorts. If you would leave, if government got out of the way, and basically diffuse the federal government, give the power back to the states, and let the market take care of itself, it will take care of itself. But what happens is the government gets in there, starts tinkering around, and they mess things up. They mess things up by ordering vaccines that don't work and mandating that we take them. And now that's capitalist fault? That's not capitalism. That's socialism. That is the government doing something against what the market wants. And the market will eventually correct and create
Right. So like here's the thing. If I were what like a guy like Moish Pistone called tradition.
I did see your Chris Catrona interview. By the way,
yeah. If I were,
and I saw your critical cut. So
So if I was like what Pistone calls a traditional Marxist, you and I would have some pretty fundamental disagreements, because a traditional Marxist view would say the problem with capitalism is when private individuals own capital, and then rather than it being owned collectively. And so that's what a traditional Marxist would say, according to Pistone, right? I don't say that though.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I don't say that. This distinction between private ownership of capital and production for private ends and the public or state ownership of capital and production for supposedly public ends are, for the good of the community and all. To me, neither one is going to be free from some kind of fundamental consequences of using labor time to create value. And I'm going to bracket that, but that's the point here, is that you and I aren't disagreeing so much about private versus public, or the state versus the entrepreneurial capital. We're disagreeing about how capitalism works, not how the state works or how private companies work, but how capital works. And so that's not a question that has to do with values, really. That's a question like if you and I were trying to determine the limits of playing, like what can be accomplished in playing chess. How many moves is the minimum number of moves before you can get a checkmate, right? Mm-hmm. And you and I were disagreeing, and I had, I don't know what, I think it's 2. I think you can actually get it in 2.
It's a thing called the scholar mate.
Yeah, something like that.
It's more than 2, I think, but it's not
like
much
3.
More than that.
It's like 3, maybe
3 or 4.
Yeah, but you can get it in a very, I could look that up. But we could debate. Like I could say, no, God damn it, it's 2, and you could say, no, it's 4, and then we'd have to do some like reasoning and maybe some empirical. We wouldn't just sit there and play games of chess until we figured it out. We'd have to think about the rules of chess and do some computer modeling, or probably be a good idea to pick up some chess books, because probably some people already have answers to this. But then what we'd find is, depending on when they were written, they would be different answers. There are times when people would say, oh, you can never open with the queen's pawn.
We're getting into,
do you know what I'm saying?
We're getting into postmodernism here, I think.
Well, are we? Because I think.
But wait a second. I got something to say about.
When it comes to chess, I think the people who said, "Oh, opening with the queen is always a bad idea. It never works. No one does that. No one should ever do that," were wrong. For a long time, that was.
Are you a chess player?
I played chess a bit. I'm not a great chess player.
I'm a big chess player. I'm not very good, but I like to play a lot.
So you and I are the same when it comes to chess. We both like the game. Neither one of us are anywhere close to chess masters. So,
hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make the 2-move checkmate. And in order to make this move, you must be playing as black, and your opponent must be playing as white. Now, which is right here, and they must move it 1 or 2 spaces forward. Now what you're going to do is move your pawn on e7 1 or 2 spaces forward. Now when it's your opponent's turn, they must move their pawn on g2 not one, but 2 spaces forward. Now for your second and final move, you're going to be moving your queen to h4 right here to put your opponent in checkmate.
All right. You said you were gonna beat me at chess.
Yeah, no. I know. No, watch. G4. Get the bishop out.
I'm just gonna play simple chess. I'm just putting my pawn in the center of the board. Nothing secret.
Move my. She's not gonna see this fucking coming.
Well, thanks for watching.
I think it's 3 or 4 moves. You know, queen, pawn out, queen, bishop, two kings.
Well, you're better than I am. You know, you can remember the scholar's mate. But yeah. So what are you saying?
That's
there?
The answer, but it's not as simple as that because the opponent can postpone that or stop it.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not saying that the rules of capitalism are simple and that if you make these moves, you'll always mate your opponent in 4 moves. I'm saying that there are questions we can ask about how capitalism works that we can get close to an objective answer about.
But I don't think you're asking the right questions. Let me respond to what you said.
Okay.
And it is time to unveil the Dragon Quotient.
Okay, go.
Because the Dragon Quotient, the Dragon Project is my project, which is a project of meritocracy related to education that is expanded from an educational program around the game to overall philosophy. And the Dragon Quotient simply says that everybody should be worth more than they take in society. Okay, kind of a Kantian.
Everyone should be worth more.
They should produce more.
They should produce more. Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so under that, some businesses would be productive. There are businesses that are producing more than they take. There are businesses that are doing great things in society. And then there are monopolistic businesses who squelch out competition, are actually inhibiting progress and innovation in a given market. And yet these people are making more and more money. So they get to where in a really terrific fashion, where they are hurting society much more than they are taking. They are a positive force because they are making tons of money in compensation for actually doing damage to society or to a market. And the problem with Marxism is capitalism is bad. There's no distinction between a business that is a positive thing and a business that is a negative thing. And
okay, let me ask you.
And that's again throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Let me ask you a couple questions about this.
You have to look at each business and is it doing good? There are a lot of people making a lot of money. Are they worth the money? There are businesses that are doing, wonderful things or providing kind of staple items that we all take for granted. But then there are these monopolies. We could talk about zombie businesses that the government props up and they.
Where does the problem of basically theft from these monopoly businesses take place? Does it take place at the level of I'm going to pay less for a product than it's worth, like Walmart is an example.
Well, more Walmart let me charge more than a product's worth because you can't go anywhere else to get it.
You can pay less too. Like Walmart demands from its providers, the vendors that provide the goods for the stores, that they severely mark down the price of their products. And in some cases, Walmart will get from a vendor some of the items at less than cost, less than what it costs them to produce it. And the reason they are able to do that is because the businesses that are providing those goods to Walmart will see, well, even though I'm losing every time I sell, stereo equipment through Walmart, I'm still needing access to Walmart to sell this other product that I make at a small margin.
Could be.
And overall, I can't afford to lose this market, access to this market. I can't afford to lose this relationship. So I will let them gouge me because overall it would be better for me to do so. So is it that kind of relationship that you're talking about?
It's kind of complicated, but there's a term called economies of scale, which is how someone like a Walmart, they sell so much of something that they set up this supply line and it drives the price down, as opposed to like a mom and pop that don't sell that amount to be able to get those kind of discounts. So in the short term, that might seem like a benefit, that Walmart is actually doing good things for the customer by creating more value, lower prices on things. The problem becomes is when Walmart starts to put the mom and pop businesses out of business. And then they get to the point where they're a monopoly, and once they've eliminated the competition, then they can start gouging, or they can start abusing that power, which we see in the social media space. That's what Twitter does. Twitter, or I don't want to pick on any, but the big tech.
they're all. It
seems like they're doing a good thing, where they're creating all this, but when it comes right down to it, when we need them, they take that monopolistic power that they have used over time, and they abuse it. And that's specifically supposed to be guaranteed to not happen by the government. It's the government's job to stop monopolies. And, the government is not doing a very good job at that. As a matter of fact, you might even argue that they're contributing to the problem at this point. But that's why price gouging is illegal, where someone can say, okay, we're going to price something so low that it's going to put the competition out of business. And sure, that would seem like a benefit in the short term to a customer. But once the competition's gone, then they can charge anything they want or do anything they want, or even control your life to say, we're not even going to sell this to you unless you behave the way we want you to. That's what we're seeing now. We're seeing.
Right. Yeah. So let's you and I just agree. I do not like authoritarian centralized control. I don't like big monopolies. I'm with you in terms of the value, especially because I want to see everyone be able to contribute and express themselves, not just like in words, but through creative acts. I want people to be able to, as I said, see a problem in the world. Oh, there aren't enough hula hoops, and try to solve it. Right. So we agree about that.
Free speech absolutist, right?
I am a free speech absolutist. Absolutely. As close as you can come within,
so we would agree
remain within reason.
Do we have that now?
No.
No.
Why?
I'm not. Why do we not have that? Look,
well, right now the biggest censors are these big tech companies working in collusion with the state.
Who with the advantage of the government, they had that clause that allowed them to avoid being a publisher so they could take things down. They promised to be good stewards of the public forum, and they came to where they dominated the market. And then the minute we needed them to truly be good stewards of the public forum, they betrayed us.
Yeah,
they stabbed us in the back.
And it's not just these companies. It's not just the companies that betrayed us. The state has been
but that's
behaving in a very unconstitutional way. Because when you start to, when these politicians say Facebook needs to do something about the spread of misinformation, that is them, the state.
That's horrifying.
That is the state encroaching on free expression. That is what that is. It's not that, and then they make these backroom deals. If you want to continue to get these tax breaks or continue to have this kind of legislation that helps your business, you're going to have to do what we say when it comes to limiting speech on your platforms.
But this is the problem with progressivism. Think about it. Our founders' fathers said, do not let the government get big and powerful.
Right. Well, look, you and I don't disagree about
be self-sufficient, be on your own. We want freedom. We want a government that keeps people out of our hair, but we don't go be in our hair. And what we do, we created the nanny state. We centralized power. We created the nanny state, and businesses use that power to monopolize the market. That's what has happened, and we're paying for that mistake, and we need to get back to.
You and I don't disagree about progressivism or the way that the expansion of the state, and certainly the way the state has violated constitutionally protected rights lately is a problem. I'm not a progressive Democrat. Okay, so that's not despite the fact that I know it gets harder and harder to tell the difference between someone who's on the left and is a socialist and a progressive Democrat. And sometimes I may accidentally just revert into my origins, which was to come out of like the progressive democratic wing. Because when I was a kid, the only thing on the left,
again where the words are so convoluted now that we don't even know.
I try to
progressivism, socialism. What does socialism even mean?
Well, like socialism,
communism, collectivism.
Well, collectivism and communism are not exactly the same thing. Okay, I'll tell you what I think of socialism as being. Okay. I think of socialism as beginning around the same time as the French Revolution, around the same time, maybe earlier than that, but certainly in the middle of the 19th century, in 1848, when there was a struggle against autocracy, against monarchies, against empire, and for national sovereignty and the rights of labor and the rights of the bourgeoisie. Socialism was a part of that struggle. It was a wing within the revolutionary struggles of the 19th century in 1848. It was the most radical wing of the bourgeois revolutions that, you can see them in France, you can see them in America, the U.S., the American Revolution. You can see them in Haiti. You can see those revolutionary struggles in Russia. The Russian Revolution was coming out of that same struggle. And the bourgeois revolution overall has just had tremendous trouble being completed. It just has not been completed. Socialism is a group of radicals who want to realize the promises of the bourgeois revolutions. They want to realize liberty and equality, fraternity. They want to break with autocracy and with authoritarianism and with monarchs and priests and things like that. And they want to create a society where everyday people, civil society, are free to produce the world that they live in. That's what socialism is. It's the goal. That's the goal of socialism. The socialism is the history of that struggle. And it includes people who wanted to turn the seas of the world into lemonade. It includes people who thought the most important thing would be to make everyone a vegetarian. It includes people who were for free love and the free sharing of all wives. It includes all sorts of different kinds of anarchists, and unfortunately it includes Stalinism. It includes Maoism. It includes statism. That came up too, that all these attempts to create a system where a society where everyone would be free are part of the socialist tradition. And it also includes the loss of the vision of freedom as a part of the socialist struggle.
What is the mechanics of how socialism would work? And up through Marx and through the kind of communist tradition is this idea that you're going to give power to someone like a Stalin or like a Mao or like Bernie Sanders, and they're going to take that power from kind of the top down and then create a system where then the people are going to have control. And what happens is it never happens. The power goes to some person who promises to give power to the people, and ultimately the same thing happens. We have another dictator.
So this problem of authoritarianism.
How is the mechanics of how you are going to get to this idea where you give power to a socialist leader and the dictatorship of the proletariat?
Dictatorship of the proletariat, yeah. How is that
going to where that authority melts away, right? And then you're just left with the
I tell you,
the proletariat.
I have,
but it doesn't work.
This is something that when I talk to Chris Catrone, we debate, right? This is something that people within the socialist tradition, when they air their dirty laundry to each other, have to argue about, and it dates back to the First International, the first socialist group. And first socialists weren't all Marxists, right? They were anarchists, and those Lassalleans. They're all sorts of different kinds of socialists. They were utopian socialists, and they argued about how can we create a free society. And the Marxists argued that there was a use for the state after the revolution and imposing the freedom of the proletariat on society, not
imposing the freedom.
Right. Well, like right now we
Okay.
have what Marx would call like the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, or the dictatorship of capital is how he would call it, what he would say.
Well,
So,
again, as you define it, not as I define it.
right. No, but as
your
Marx
capitalism is
right. No, we have. I mean, the first thing and this is again an argument within socialism. What's the right way to understand capitalism? The difference between Lassalle and Marx was about what's the source of value. What can we just modify money and create a free society, or do we have to modify at the level of production? What are the best instruments to make those modifications? These are all questions within bourgeois / socialist revolution.
Exactly.
They're not okay.
So what you're proposing is to have people come in and manipulate these factors rather than just letting the market do that.
Well, I mean,
and that's as a free enterprise constitutionalist. And
well, you have to understand that in the 19th century, this idea of a market, like when Adam Smith's time, right? This idea of a market-led society was not, Tom, it was not natural. It was advocated for. It was a political project. Okay. There was an enclosure movement. There was a use of the state to impose it. What was swept away was feudalism. And through revolutionary political struggle, this market-led bourgeois capitalist society came to be. And it didn't just come to be like that. It came to be slowly over time. And it wasn't until the 20th century that most of the world was broken up into nations. I mean, like, there was still remnants of the old empires in the early parts of the 20th century. When you think about who went to war in World War I, they weren't these clearly defined nation states.
The rise of nationalism is key to understanding how World War I comes about. Perfect illustration, Eastern Europe. Look at Serbia. Serbians are saying, we don't want to be ruled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's an old, tired, imperialistic structure. We are our own country. It's the Serbians who assassinate Archduke Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, and of course, that's the trigger that begins the whole conflict.
The outbreak of the war intensifies national feelings. It also makes nationalism the language both of war and of the post-war settlement.
And more than that, it made the people who had fought the war feel like they had earned something.
So if you go to Versailles, if you go to the treaty negotiations, you can see them discussing the rights of small nations, the rights of national self-determination. Those are words that Wilson uses. And he wanted nations to be independent, discrete things.
He saw a world that would never again go to war. A world where squabbles between nations could be settled diplomatically, where they could not have to be settled militarily. This was to him the war to end all wars.
You said something earlier, which was right. When you say capitalism, you mean socialism, because socialism because capitalism came out of socialism. The capitalism came out of this socialist.
Let me explain what I mean.
Movement. Yeah, okay.
Don't put words in my mouth here. Let me.
Okay.
This kind of goes back to my idea that businesses are living things. We have talked about this in the past. We did on Twitch.
Right. Well, see, this is where you and I disagree, because I'm saying no. You can see the kinds of business contracts and the formation of these of the market and the private enterprise emerging out of historical struggle and not organically out of just nature.
Well, just bear with me, because I'm talking more in an abstract. So what I'm saying is this idea again of the dragon quotient, where someone is producing more than they're getting in compensation. And that's why a business works. Mutual gain. A customer is paying for something. It's worth more to him than it costs to make it. So the customer gets the product. The business gets the profit from selling the product. So there's a synergy there of people that happens. And I think that synergy is this thing that you see, which is inherent in social interactions. You know, people interact socially, and there's a synergy that happens when people are helping each other. They become part of things that are larger than themselves, and there's synergy in that. So we're both looking at that synergy. I'm looking at synergy in capitalism, but there's the difference is in capitalism, there is a very tight structure that makes that happen. It's inherent in the free market. You have a product that is available, and the person has a choice. Here's the price. It's either worth it to that person or not. So that's kind of built into the cake. So there's a structure. So socialism wants the same thing, but they've never found a structure that works that. I mean, Marx kind of advocated from giving the power to a dictator to create this melting into the dictatorship of the proletariat. There's been talk of anarchy, trying to organically have it bottom up along the lines of the French Revolution, although, you know, that didn't go well. But what we see is it never really worked. So you're talking about all this history and socialism, and what you're not talking about is what happened in the United States in that time, where in effect, exactly what you wanted to happen happened. George Washington took power. They wanted him to be king. And he rejected power and gave the power to the people via the Constitution, via laws. And we've had an unprecedented, not perfect, and there are problems, and it's been almost undermined from the beginning.
A lot of people say that the American Revolution didn't end until after the Civil War. That the Civil War was the final chapter in the American Revolution, because the elimination of slavery and the true, you know, and in some ways that the revolution continues in America.
I can see why that, because really life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, equality for all was something that was proclaimed in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, but we didn't really achieve it until until the Civil War,
and we're still trying to achieve it, because I mean, it just is, you know, within my lifetime. Well, not quite, but the civil rights movement was right before I was born. So the end of segregation was right before I was born, right? And if you have a society where there is a class of people who can't own certain kinds of property or live in certain areas, the state intervenes and allows for there to be that level of discrimination and inequality between people, then you don't have a free society. So, you know, the civil rights movement was a continuation of the original revolution to free all working people and allow for competition on an equal level between all people. Right? So, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, the American...
I would say that we've digressed in anti-racism. The woke anti-racism is a digression away from what I would consider a color blindness as the kind of ideal that Martin Luther King strove for. And I believe I certainly that we came pretty close to obtaining that. Certainly
I would say, like, as long...
I think we're going backwards now.
Well, yeah, right. Well, when it comes to, like, the anti-racist movements, as long as people forget that what the aim is to liberate all individuals in society, and instead start to think about reaching quotas, like leaving things as they are, but just making every strata of society equal. Like when you say, oh, what's most important is to have women, on corporate boards, you're like allowing for so much.
What's most important is to have the most qualified person on the corporate board.
Well, I mean, isn't what's most important to break with monopoly power also, and get the state to stop propping up these corporations that aren't necessarily right?
I agree with
so
that.
Like, yeah, the more women on the boards of these corporations that you would define as being, kind of parasites on society, that's no kind of progress,
no,
right?
Not if the government installed these women. That's not the point.
Or even if they didn't, even if it was, even as long as the government's propping up those corporations, right? That's still a problem. But the thing is, like, what happens overall is like we think on the level of appearance, we think about the immediate, we let things get framed by terms that are too narrow, and we don't think through like, oh yeah, remember the goal is to liberate all people so they can all participate in producing a better world and everyone has a chance, like, and when we lose sight of that and we start to argue only about, whether or not quotas are fair to men or something like that, we lose sight of the true revolutionary struggle. The same thing is true in reverse. Like when the women's movement decides, the most important thing is to make sure that there are an equal number of women presidents to men presidents. It's like, well, wait a minute, that can't be the aim, because the aim is all people free. And that doesn't mean that, then we start to argue about, tactics, like what's going to be the next step? What's the most important battle on the way? But if you lose sight of that everyone being free. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.